Weaponized vulnerability. When someone opens up about their trauma within the first few conversations, it feels like intimacy, like trust. But here's what most people miss. Vulnerability can be a manipulation tactic. Real emotional openness builds gradually as trust develops. Weaponized vulnerability is the trauma dump that happens way too fast, creating false closeness before you actually know this person. They share deeply personal pain, and suddenly you feel responsible for them. You feel special because they chose you to confide in. That's the trap. What's actually happening is they're creating emotional debt. By sharing their pain early, they make you feel like you owe them patience, understanding, forgiveness, for behaviors that would otherwise be red flags. When they snap at you or cross your boundaries, you remember their difficult childhood and you make excuses. The vulnerability becomes a shield against accountability. You become their emotional caretaker instead of their partner. This usually comes from genuine pain that hasn't been processed. They're looking for someone to fix them or absorb their emotional chaos. What makes this damaging is that your role becomes therapist, not equal partner. You're managing their emotions while your own needs get buried. Real vulnerability is mutual and unfolds slowly as safety is established. Weaponized vulnerability is one-sided, rushed, and ultimately extractive. Covert contracts. Someone does something nice for you that you didn't ask for, then later they're upset because you didn't reciprocate exactly how they expected. That's a covert contract. They mow your lawn without being asked, then they're furious you didn't invite them to dinner. They listen to your vent, then they're hurt you didn't help them move. You never agreed to any of this. They created obligations in their head and got angry when you didn't fulfill terms you never knew existed. This shows up everywhere. They give, but it's not generous. It's transactional. They're building credit they plan to cash in later, except you don't know you're running a tab. When they explode about how much they've done for you, you're blindsided. You thought they were being kind. Turns out they were keeping score. This behavior usually stems from fear of direct communication combined with the need for control. They can't ask for what they want openly, so they give first, creating unspoken obligations. When you don't meet their unspoken expectations, they feel justified in their resentment. Real generosity doesn't come with invisible strings. The problem is covert contracts poison relationships slowly. You start feeling anxious about accepting help because you don't know what you're signing up for. Every favor feels like a trap. Healthy relationships operate on explicit agreements and genuine generosity. If someone needs something, they ask. If they give something, it's freely given. Boundary testing. Someone doesn't blow past your boundaries all at once. That would be obvious. Instead, they test them in small ways, gradually pushing to see how much you'll tolerate. First, they show up early without asking. Then, they're looking through your phone. Then, they're making plans for you without checking. Each violation is small enough that calling it out feels like overreacting. But taken together, they're systematically eroding your autonomy. Manipulators are remarkably patient with this strategy. They understand that if they tried to control your phone or dictate your schedule on day one, you'd leave. So they start small. They comment about your friend, planting doubt. They ask to see your phone once. They guilt trip you for spending time away. Each time you let something slide, they learn where your boundaries are flexible, and flexible boundaries become non-existent with enough pressure. This works because of the boiling frog effect. Drop a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. Put it in cold water and heat gradually. It doesn't notice danger until it's too late. People stay in controlling relationships because the decline happens incrementally. Each boundary violation seems minor. You don't want to be dramatic, so you let it go, until one day you realize you have no privacy, no autonomy, and no voice. Pay attention to small things. If someone repeatedly pushes against your stated boundaries, even in minor ways, that's not affection, that's testing. Emotional hostage taking. They don't say it directly, but the message is clear. If you leave, something bad will happen to them. They'll spiral. They'll fall apart. They don't know what they'd do without you. When you try to set a boundary or express unhappiness, they talk about how dark things were before you, how you're the only thing keeping them stable, how they can't handle losing you. It's not quite a threat, it's heavier than that. It's making you feel responsible for their survival. This shows up in statements that sound vulnerable, but function as chains. You're the only good thing in my life. I was in such a bad place before I met you. I don't think I could go back to how things were. After a fight, they might mention feeling depressed or struggling, making sure, your actions have consequences for their mental state. When you talk about needing space, they remind you of their abandonment issues, their past suicide attempt, their fragile mental health. You're not just ending a relationship, you're potentially destroying a person. What makes this manipulation so effective is that it exploits your empathy and decency. You're not a monster. You don't want to hurt someone who's already struggling. You don't want to be responsible for pushing someone over the edge. So you stay. You swallow your unhappiness. You accept mistreatment because leaving feels like pulling the trigger on someone's breakdown. They've made their well-being your responsibility, and that responsibility becomes a cage. What makes emotional hostage-taking particularly damaging is that it corrupts the foundation of the relationship. You're not staying because you want to. You're staying because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. That's not love, that's captivity. And the resentment that builds from feeling trapped will eventually poison whatever genuine connection existed. Real partners take responsibility for their own mental health. They might lean on you for support, but they don't make you the sole architect of their stability. If someone's entire emotional well-being depends on your presence, that's not a relationship. That's a hostage situation. By the way, if you're finding this helpful, I post content like this regularly. I'd appreciate if you subscribe. Thanks. Disguised isolation. When someone wants to spend all their time with you and suggests your friends don't really get your relationship, it can feel romantic, like you found your person. But what's actually happening is isolation dressed up as devotion. This starts with an us against the world mentality. They create an atmosphere where the relationship is sacred, separate from everyone else. Slowly, they're cutting you off from your support system. Not with demands at first, with subtle discouragements. They get quiet when you make plans without them. They create conflict before you're supposed to see friends. Eventually, it's easier to say no to other people than deal with the tension. The psychology here is about control. Isolated people are easier to control because they have no outside perspective, no one to reality check what's happening. But it's also about insecurity. They believe that if you have access to other people, you'll realize you can do better and leave. So they make themselves your entire world. What makes this dangerous is that by the time you recognize it, you've lost your support network. Your friends stopped reaching out. Your family feels distant. You're alone with this person, and leaving feels impossible. The isolation that felt like intimacy has become a cage. Real love encourages connection with others, the empathy gap. They expect you to understand their stress, their bad moods, their need for space, their struggles, and you do. You're endlessly patient, but when you're stressed, when you need support, suddenly there's no empathy to be found. Your problems are inconvenient, your emotions are too much. Your needs are poorly timed. There's always a reason why they can't show up for you the way you show up for them. This is the empathy gap. Emotional labor only flows in one direction. You're the perpetual supporter, therapist, cheerleader, and they're the perpetual recipient, never quite able to reciprocate. When you point this out, they have explanations. They're going through a hard time. They're not good at emotional stuff. They'll do better once things settle down. But things never settle down. This pattern usually stems from selfishness and emotional immaturity. They've learned that if they center their own struggles, they can avoid the discomfort of being there for someone else. Supporting others requires putting your needs aside temporarily, and they're unwilling or unable to do that. The impact is profound. You learn that your emotions aren't safe with this person. You learn to minimize your struggles, to handle everything alone. You become smaller in the relationship until you're barely there at all. Just a source of support for them, not a full person. Healthy relationships have reciprocal empathy. The empathy gap is a fundamental statement about whose feelings matter, and the answer is not yours. Selective amnesia. They don't remember promising to change. They don't remember agreeing to your boundary. They don't remember the fight where they admitted they were wrong, but they remember perfectly every mistake you've made. This isn't gaslighting. This is selective amnesia, conveniently forgetting whatever doesn't serve them while maintaining perfect recall of anything that makes you look bad. This pattern is maddening because it's hard to prove. They genuinely claim they don't remember. Maybe they were stressed. Maybe you're misremembering. They're not saying it didn't happen. They just have no recollection. Without proof, you're left feeling like you're going crazy. What makes this insidious is that it functions as a get out of accountability free card. If they don't remember agreeing to something, they can't be held responsible for breaking that agreement. Their memory loss becomes a shield against consequences. Meanwhile, your mistakes are cataloged with perfect clarity. The psychology here is about avoiding shame or protecting self-image. Remembering their failures would require confronting the fact that they're not the person they believe themselves to be. It's easier to forget. Living with selective amnesia is exhausting. You can't build on past conversations. You can't expect follow-through on agreements. You're constantly relitigating the same issues. Nothing sticks. Nothing changes. Because in their version, this is the first time you're bringing it up. Strategic incompetence. Watch what happens when you ask them to do something they don't want to do. Suddenly, they don't know how. They can't figure it out. They do it so badly that you redo it yourself. They're competent adults everywhere else, but when it comes to household tasks or relationship responsibilities, they're mysteriously helpless. This is strategic incompetence. Being bad at something on purpose so you stop asking. They don't know how to load the dishwasher, so you do it. They can't remember to call your mother, so you handle all family communication. They're terrible at planning dates, so you take over the mental load. Every time they mess up or claim ignorance, you have two choices: let it stay undone or do it yourself. And because you care about things being done well, you do it yourself, which is exactly what they wanted. This stems from refusal to take equal responsibility combined with understanding that if they make it unpleasant enough, you'll stop asking. Incompetence is rewarded with freedom from responsibility, and if you complain, they frame it as you being controlling. They were trying to help. You're the one who can't accept their efforts. What makes this damaging is the imbalance it creates. You're doing the work of two people while they coast. You're carrying the mental load while they show up and participate in the life you've created. Strategic incompetence is a form of control, a way of opting out of partnership while still reaping the benefits, rewriting the narrative. This isn't gaslighting where they deny events happened. They change the meaning of what happened. You were hurt they ignored you at the party. They weren't ignoring you. They were giving you space. You were upset they canceled plans last minute. They weren't canceling. They were protecting your evening because you sounded tired. Every time you express hurt, they reframe their behavior into something noble. And suddenly, you're the unreasonable one. This tactic is crazy making because they're not denying reality. They're reinterpreting it in a way that makes them look good and makes you look irrational. The facts aren't in dispute. The meaning is. And because meaning is subjective, it's nearly impossible to argue against. You end up doubting your own read on situations, questioning whether you're being too sensitive. What's happening is deflection through reframing. Instead of taking accountability for impact, they're centering their intention. This allows them to avoid apologizing, avoid changing, and avoid confronting the possibility that they're not the partner they believe themselves to be. The long-term effect is that you lose trust in your own perceptions. You start second-guessing everything. You become easier to manipulate because you no longer trust your judgment. In healthy relationships, both people's experiences are valid. Impact matters alongside intention. When someone consistently rewrites the narrative to erase their responsibility, that's manipulation. Defensive deflection. Try bringing up something that bothered you. Before you finished explaining, they're already bringing up something you did wrong. Every attempt to address an issue gets immediately redirected to your flaws. This is defensive deflection, the inability to hear criticism without making it about the other person's faults instead. This pattern makes conflict resolution impossible. You can never discuss the issue you raised. The conversation always becomes about defending yourself against their counter accusations. You wanted to talk about them canceling plans. Now you're explaining why you were late to dinner 3 weeks ago. The original issue disappears, and somehow you've ended up apologizing to them. What drives this is usually shame and inability to tolerate criticism. Hearing that they've hurt you feels unbearable, so they deflect that feeling onto you. If they can make you the bad guy, they don't have to sit with the discomfort of being wrong. It's a protection mechanism that prevents growth, accountability, and real intimacy. The impact is corrosive. You stop bringing things up because it's not worth the fight. You swallow your hurt because expressing it leads to being attacked. Issues build up, resentment grows, and connection dies. You can't be vulnerable with someone who weaponizes your honesty against you. Healthy partners can hear feedback without collapsing into defensiveness. They understand that relationships require both people to take accountability. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing so you don't miss future uploads. Thanks for watching.